Hi everyone, welcome back to the Science Data and Analytics track. Up now, we have a really exciting panel discussion on ethical AI from talk to practice. Sorry, I just completely blanked on the name. We got three great panelists, and moderating this talk will be Nigel. Nigel, you want to take it away?
Thank you very much, Rachel. Thanks for having us around the PyCon online AU campfire today and here in the Curly Boy Theatre. I should start with a joke. That's kind of normal for these things. And it goes a mathematician, an astrophysicist, a geophysicist, a designer, an astronomer, a geneticist, a historian, a philosopher of science, a psychologist, all go into a bar. And actually, that describes the panel. The joke is there's only 3 people, but what incredible people to have in a room to talk about science, data, and analytics. And as this fabric of this so-called civil society kind of becomes increasingly digitized and data-driven, and our lives are nudged in the direction constantly of what's presented to us and data-driven every day, an increasing awareness of this underlying current, the importance of ethical matters, and ethical AI has become a term, is what we're going to talk about today. Issues being called out in particular, data privacy. We've all lived through the nightmares of those things. The harm that algorithmic bias has had on society, negative repercussions of unchecked recommendation systems, blindly maximizing engagements. We have the finest minds of a generation putting adverts on Google. So ethical AI, a great thing to talk about in a conference on data and AI and science today. Amazed to be joined by my fellow panelists. I lower the average IQ and the number of university degrees by a significant factor amongst this panel. So welcome, team. Welcome, Fiona Milne. Welcome, Arna Karick and Lizzie Silver. They're all on Twitter too, so if you're tweeting live, get on there and be part of the conversation accordingly. And I thought we might start with Fiona. So quick self-intro. Fiona, how did you get here? How did you come to be on this screen at PyCon today?
So I, quite a few years ago now, studied maths at university. I've been working with data in industry for over a decade now. 2 years ago, I founded the Melbourne chapter of the Women in Machine Learning and Data Science meetup. And this year I took on a new role as head of AI and data at a software company called Whisper. It's a new role that where I'm building out a team that's going to be delivering some machine learning and AI features. Now is a really good time for me to start diving into ethics.
Because Whisper's pretty high stakes. That's been involved in some of the COVID response. It's involved in fire warnings. It's almost every crisis that Australia's faced in the last 12 months or so. So we'll look forward to hearing more from you. Anna, how did you get here? What's been your path through that giant list of qualifications I called out before?
Yeah, so I'm another astronomer turned data scientist and / accidental designer. So I've worked kind of in the last 6 years after I left academia in various data science roles and research data strategy. So working in academia and also at a retail tech startup in London, and then in a design studio as kind of the first data scientist. And it was a design studio that sort of held ethical tech and design sort of very high in their priorities. And so in parallel to that, I am also co-director of Random Hacks for Kindness. So Lizzie and I have been involved in ROC for years now. And I guess that's where my ethical tech interest really comes from. But in terms of actual ethical AI, a lot of it really has stemmed from your AI Australia podcast, Nigel, and the Melbourne Responsible AI Meetup group. And then just sort of the growing community of machine learning experts and designers in Melbourne who are really kind of embracing a lot of this work.
You're in a real sweet spot at the moment because there's been some absolutely grievous visualizations of data and self-serving in some ways. So I hope we get back around to that, but we do just need to talk to Lizzie and ask the same question. Lizzie, beautiful piece of art in the background, by the way. And how did you come to be in this digital room here around this digital campfire in Adelaide?
Well, I am a data scientist at Silver Pond. I got there because I did my PhD at Carnegie Mellon working on methods for learning causal models. So I have an interest in causation. That PhD actually was in a philosophy department. So I got a passing familiarity with ethics there, had to take some required ethics classes. But I've been interested in using data science for good ends for a long time. I did the Data Science for Social Good Fellowship in 2015. And that was really what started me thinking about what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What counts as social good? Anyway, now I'm at Silver Pond, which is an AI company based in Melbourne. And I'm working on more computer vision models and regular data science.
Sounds good.
I also
Yeah,
forgot to, just to wind that up, I supervised a project on counterfactual fairness recently, which is the main reason I'm on this panel.
Okay, so my life's intruding into my stream here because I have builders in the building. I'm going to quickly pass to Fiona to talk about some of the work you've been doing. They've stopped at last. What are the odds? Fiona, let's talk about, because we want to get today from talking to doing stuff, and you're very involved in some major doing. You're setting up a whole practice within Whisper. What sort of work are you? How does data play into that? Is it just CRM data? Is it behavioral data? What's key for you?
I mean, it's all key. For the most part, with regards to like ethical AI, I've very much been a bystander. I know that lots of colleagues that I've worked with in the past have been super interested in it. I know that Eliza, a company that I previously worked at, are building out ethical frameworks and stuff. But yeah, like I said, I've always been a bystander, just kind of following along. But now that I'm building out a team that's going to be delivering features and products that where this can really make a difference. There's a lot of risk involved because we deal with quite a varied range of use cases, kind of ranging from the crisis alerting to one-time passwords to kind of less important use cases, but still important with regards to marketing messages. So part of the kind of 5-year plan for Whisper is to send less messages, so like be sending the right kind of messages at the right time. So yes, it might be using my brain towards some of that ads tech world where a lot of the brain's focusing, but I'm really hoping to be part of it to make sure that we're reducing the noise there, and also the awesome use cases around crisis management. For example, the bushfire alerting and COVID responses is a really cool use case in New Zealand where the hearing impaired can text to receive emergency services. So yeah, just really excited to be part of something and something like that where I can kind of bake in ethical thoughts, ethical frameworks at the very early stages of building it out, so that it's there and the team and the rest of the business are all encouraged to kind of talk about ethics, to bring up any ethical concerns if they believe there's bias or issues. They are just really encouraging to people to be accountable and to challenge things.
I'm going to jump on one thing. You were talking about policies and frameworks. That fascinates me because you're codifying something that is a kind of this soft DNA code around behaviors and ethics, those kind of things. Pitch to Arna. Now, you've you've implemented policies and frameworks. So I'd love to hear reflections around, is it different in an academic setting to a work setting? How do we get that done when people go back to the office today? Where do you even start with frameworks?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. So my direct experience with this has been kind of from a research data strategy perspective. And like all companies and universities, a lot of the kind of developing data or AI ethics frameworks comes from a risk and compliance standpoint, primarily. Everyone's worried about getting into trouble.
Everyone just went to sleep, Arna, so make it more exciting.
I know, and that is the challenge. So I wrote Swinburne's very high-level data policies and the guidelines specifically for researchers. And the challenge there was, how do you translate a very high-level framework into actual tools and things that people can use in their day-to-day research? And the gap between those two things is really wide. And when you take that kind of stick and not the carrot approach, you do get a lot of pushback. So I think that's like a definite challenge in this space of even getting people excited about wanting to be more ethical with their data, and then actually turning that into something practical. It'd
be super interesting to see in the like, you can just, everyone who's watching, you can get on Venulus and talk about this. It'd be interesting to see how many people are actually working in a place that has a framework of some kind. Now, you did pitch in on the kind of the dark side there a little bit, and I'd like to ask Lizzie about what are the potential pitfalls and data horror stories. But what can you do? Like that, I think that's always it. What can I do as a practitioner to make that better? What's your advice?
I think that's actually a difficult question. There's a lot of things you can try. There are a lot of different competing standards for what counts as a fair algorithm. If you think that your algorithm's biased, then the question is, how do I make it fair? What do you mean by fair? I think that my personal opinion is the best definition of fairness is whether the algorithm is counterfactually fair. That means, would it have made the same decision for a man as for a woman, for a black person as for a white person? Had I been born a man, would the algorithm have made the same decision about me that it made given that I'm a woman? Now that is quite a hard question to answer, right? I can't rewind time and be born a man. So the way that we try to answer that question is using a causal model of the world. And the answer then depends on whether you get that causal model correct. So the project that I supervised my intern Zaga Tommen on, I had her try to create data from a causal model that she'd just drawn up. So she knew by construction that that was the correct causal model of that data set. And then see whether she could make an algorithm that was making decisions for people in that data set, see whether she could make that biased algorithm fair. It worked perfectly. Then we tried it on a real data set, and the answers just didn't make sense because the causal model wasn't quite right. So I think like that is the best definition of fairness, and there's work now in academia on how to apply it, how to make algorithms that are biased into fair algorithms. But it relies on getting like the causal model correct, actually knowing how the world works, how bias operates in the world. So I would have to know what are all the ways I've been discriminated against as a woman in order to fix the algorithm. That's a really hard question. There are some simpler methods for deciding whether an algorithm's fair or not, but they all have pitfalls. And then we have this sort of ideal method that's really hard to apply. So it's difficult, but I think that we have to try at least something because we are making decisions about people's lives. So the fact that it's hard doesn't really get us off the hook.
And Fiona, who I'm really curious because you're in that workplace environment. Who do you have in the room when these conversations are had at Whisper, for example? Who? And if you know, is it product? Is it are the engineers in the room? Who's part of this conversation about ethics around data?
Yeah, so it's in its very early stages at the moment, but ideally, yeah, product would be heavily involved there, and also in an ideal world, like as many domain experts as possible, the people who are being impacted by the results of that algorithm. That's not always easily done, and then yeah, really blue sky thinking philosophers, social scientists like yourself, lawyers, anthropologists. Like it really is a cross domain problem. But yeah, I very much see something that I can do as a practitioner is, as much as I hate the term, is demystify data science and AI. And there's this conception that it's like really complicated and hard to understand. So a lot of people are like almost quite scared to talk about it, think about it. But it isn't actually that hard. It's just that we haven't really done a very good job of communicating what it is and how to lay it out in simple terms so that everyone can understand what it is, so that people aren't so scared to talk about it. And I think that very much even goes back right to like kids in primary school, like getting rammed down their throats. Maths is hard, science is really tricky, especially the non-males. And yeah, so starting from that age, people are terrified of numbers. People are terrified of data and analysis. So yeah, demystifying that, explaining to business users exactly what AI is and what it isn't, and then also taking it right back to kind of grassroots and making sure that everyone knows that maths isn't as hard as it's kind of been marketed to be.
And Arna, have you ever run into challenges explaining all this to stakeholders? And I'm fascinated. Things like random acts of kindness. So there's kind of like an opportunity to be a little bit unethical with data around helping people as well.
Yeah.
Does it ever come up in those conversations?
It has, and kind of a few years ago, we started running sort of lead-up events for Rock. So things like Agile 101 for nonprofits and design thinking for nonprofits. And we're now starting to think about how we can start having these kind of more data-driven tech for nonprofit discussions, purely because we do have a lot of social entrepreneurs coming to us with those sorts of problems, and starting to think about how we can bring in that conversation. And one thing that I really love, which I hope we get to talk about at some point. So Laura Summers developed these ethics litmus test resources, and basically it's just this wonderful little card deck that just kickstarts conversations. There it is, about ethics in tech and in this space, but kind of more importantly, it starts to prompt people about those kind of grey areas. And I think just as a very first step in figuring out who should be in the room or what discussions need to happen, like that's just a very good starting point. Because ultimately the problem with all of this stuff is you don't know what you don't know. If you don't know who should be in the room, then you don't know to ask them. So just trying to find these kind of more very kind of low level, like very quick kind of workshop type methods, just to even kickstart the conversation, I think is a really good starting point.
I have the cards. I just truly love them as conversation starters. I have my favourite with me. Would this make a good episode of Black Mirror?
Everyone
Lizzie,
loves that.
Yeah, everyone loves that one. Lizzie, do you have a favourite among Laura's deck of secrets cards of ethics, or if you were to write one and add one to the deck, what would it be?
I think it's sort of joint favourites between. Have I personally talked to the people who would be affected by this, and what about the long-term consequences? Because I think one of the big issues with data science is it's really reshaping the world in these unexpected ways. Recommender algorithms deciding what news we see, for example. No one predicted that would, well, maybe probably some people did predict. I didn't predict that it would change the information ecosystem so that we suddenly have these bubbles of self-reinforcing opinions.
Fiona, I'm reading a lot about Blackbox AI systems, things like AutoML. How do you live in that world where explainability is becoming important, or you just want to get the job done and just have that algorithm running as quickly as possible, get that bot serving, the poor people who are needing rapid response? What's your take on Blackbox AI?
So personally, I avoid it because I prefer something that I can look under the hood and find out myself exactly what's going on. I do understand that it's great that it makes systems available to maybe non-technical people, but that's also super dangerous. So if you are looking to kind of go down the Blackbox AI out of the box type thing, it's definitely worthwhile just checking the reputation of the person building it, seeing if you can find out which data sets were used for training, see if they have like systems in place to check for bias. But like I said, I kind of prefer to build my own, and I think what I can do in that area is just that demystifying part. So if people can understand why black box out of the box type systems are dangerous, then they would be more likely to do a little bit more research and digging, as opposed to say, okay, let's just use this because it works.
Now, a hard question as we come into the close here. Has anyone turned down a project based on any kind of ethical concerns that they had with it? That's a pretty personal question, I'm guessing. Reputation's at stake here. Has anyone even gone close to going, nah, I'm not going there?
Yeah, work wanted me to go in for a defense grant, and I don't want to build AI for the military. In fact, a while back, before I even joined Silverpond, they got offered a piece of work developing a system to shoot down feral animals. And they turned that down. I can't take credit for this decision, I wasn't there. But they turned it down because it's too close to building an automated killing machine.
Wow.
This kind of tech is something that keeps me up at night. I'm a member of the campaign to stop killer robots because this isn't theoretical anymore. Militaries around the world are building tech that is autonomous and will make those decisions about who should be killed. That's terrifying.
And we thank you for your work in that space. We're pretty lucky in Australia to have some Toby Walsh, all sorts of people thinking about that. So, yeah, thanks for putting yourselves out there on our behalves on that. So, well, look, pragmatically, not many of our audience here today are going to go back to their jobs on Monday with a blank sheet of paper and a giant reservoir of data to come on. Let's go from talk to action. What can they do around the ethical dimensions of data? A tool, some online learning, some resources. Fiona, you go first.
So Fast AI have recently brought out a ethics course, which I would recommend. I started that this week myself. So Rachel Thomas, I think, is mainly behind that. There's lots of books. The four that I can reel off right now: Made by Humans, Weapons of Mass Destruction, Automating Inequality, and Algorithm Suppression, all happen to not be written by men as well. And also, I would recommend Twitter. There's a really healthy knowledge sharing, machine learning, AI, ethical community on Twitter. So yeah, start following some people and keep up to date with the conversation.
Arna, what's your big recommendation for all of our listeners today?
definitely Rachel Thomas's practical data ethics course. That's just a gold mine of information from everything, from case studies to current research to tooling. And I would also encourage people to start up kind of responsible meetup groups or responsible AI meetup groups or data, whatever, or ethical tech, anything in that space. If it doesn't exist in your city, it should, because a lot of us don't have formal ethics training in this space. A lot of it is community resources and discussions and finding the gaps and then filling them with our either own tool sets or reaching out to people who can help.
Thank you. I'm going to hand to our only trained, formally philosopher, ethics person, Lizzie, to close. One recommendation of something that our audience can follow on, apart from getting on Venulus and talking all about this. What's your recommendation of something to look into?
Yeah, the Data Science for Social Good team have put together a tool called Equitas, which is specifically focused on auditing algorithms for bias, particularly classifiers. So that's a great technical thing you can just apply to your tool.
Well, that's wonderful. Look, it flew by. Incredible. Great discussion. I think we probably started more discussions than we finished, but thanks to PyCon for having us today, and good luck, everyone. We'll see you on the chat, and thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank
you.
Thanks, Nigel.